Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Our topic today is moving beyond ticking a box for diversity and inclusion and how to adopt more meaningful practices in your business. We're delighted to have all of you join us today. What would be great is if we could have your attention for the next half an hour. The webinar will be around half an hour long, and in addition to that, we've built in time for any questions and answers as well. If you do have a mobile phone near you, if we can ask you just to turn it over so it doesn't distract you, and then we will kick off. So for those of you who haven't joined one of our webinars before, let's talk to you a little bit about the Curve Group. The Curve Group are the largest privately owned recruitment and HR outsourcer in the UK. We provide configurable outsource solutions across the entire life cycle of an employee. Our outsource solutions are underpinned by a range of complementary specialist consultancy and project services. Our solutions can be figured to support businesses of all shapes and sizes, from SMEs, challenger brands, right through to FTSE 200. As well as being fully embedded into a business, our solutions can wrap around and complement your existing teams, providing additional expertise and scalability when the business needs it most. Here at the Curve Group, we are really proud of everything that we deliver, and if any of you have been lucky enough to ever visit the Curve offices, you will see a number of these awards dotted around the building. But these are just some of the awards that we've received over the past years and currently sit within our trophy cabinet. So just by way of a full introduction, my name's Anna Clapton. I head up the HR consultancy section of the Curve Group business. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Lindsay George, who is one of our head of outsourced services, and Liz Ralph, who is one of our resourcing business partners. So let's just take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to take a look at what the data tells us about diversity and inclusion in businesses, shedding the business case, why you can't have diversity without inclusion, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable, your business under the microscope, box ticket versus meaningful practices, practical steps to making meaningful changes, responsibility and accountability for all, and an introduction to our Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Index. So with that in mind, what I'd love to do now is hand you over to Lindsay. So Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and hello everyone. So just to recap before I move any further, I just want to start by looking again at the aim of this webinar, and it's all about enabling you to understand how you can move beyond ticking a box when it comes to diversity and inclusion and actually adopting meaningful practices in your businesses. So before we went live with this webinar, we did use LinkedIn to do a social media poll. The question was, how confident are you that your employers are using all available resources to foster an inclusive and diverse working environment? So we'll take a look at the results now. And I think the key thing that you can see here is that it's a really mixed bag in terms of responses. The largest portion at 35% feel their business is only ticking a box, which means there's work to do. 15% also feel that their employers are not inclusive at all, which again suggests that there's a lot of businesses that need to catch up and even start to do some basics to change the way their workforce is feeling. 22% can see evidence, which is absolutely brilliant, and 28% feel their business is working towards it. So I think the results that we see here are fairly kind of cross-representative of probably conversations certainly that we have at the Curve Group with our clients, which is why we're running the session today to help everybody. So what is the data telling us? So there's going to be lots of snippets that pop up now and some stats for you to read through. but broadly what we can see is that more needs to be done. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission has conducted research which shows that women, people from ethnic minorities and people with disabilities all experience pay gaps, and that's because they have more barriers when it comes to accessing work and career progression. As we're seeing with FCA regulated businesses, we'll be required to provide more and more reporting on D&I metrics in the future. And I think this is only going to unveil the true disparity across our workforce. Interestingly, based on the current rate of progression being made to shrink the gender pay gap, it's been estimated that it will take another 30 years for us to reach the point of true parity. And then when we look at other protected characteristics covered by the Equality Act, where potentially less is being done, it's going to take even longer unless we do start to take some meaningful action to make change right now. So we'll move on now to look at where can you start with making that change. So 80% of Fortune 500 companies include their business case for investment in D&I on their corporate website. And this is actually part of the problem, because what's happening is it's coming across and being perceived by candidates and current employees as being disingenuous. I think when candidates are in interviews and start asking questions, or when we see employees making statements on Glassdoor, what we're seeing is actually the statement is just words, and there's nothing going on in those businesses to kind of back up what they're saying their statement is, which is causing people to feel disengaged. So what's the recommendation? So this is all based on research by London Business School and the Yale School of Management. And the first recommendation based on their research is to shed the business case. And as we move through, we'll look at different ways you can do that so that you're not relying on a diversity statement. So before we move forward, it seems like a good point just to remind ourselves what diversity and inclusion actually is. I think it's summed up perfectly by Verna Myers. She says, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think that's an analogy that we can all relate to one way or another. So I'm going to hand over to Liz now, who'll talk you through the next section.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start by talking through why you can't have diversity without inclusion. So as so many businesses are now setting out D&I ambitions and business cases and strategies, it's no surprise really that from a talent acquisition perspective, we're finding leaders really keen to improve the diversity of the teams when they're hiring. And that should absolutely play a key part because how you hire talent, both internally and externally, has a massive role to play in shifting the dial on diversity. However, the solution can't purely be hire more diversity, because you can't have diversity without inclusion. The two really go hand in hand. As it says here, research from Deloitte found that companies with an inclusive culture saw higher employee retention than those without. And according to Diversity and Ability, one of the biggest reasons that people leave a role is because they don't have that sense of belonging. And you've all just seen the quote, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. Well, when we think about belonging, that's like dancing like no one's watching. Belonging really allows you to bring your best self and to not just leverage our differences, but to truly celebrate them. But when it comes to improving diversity, businesses have such a focus on recruitment and attraction, but you really need to ask yourself what happens after the recruitment process ends. To enable a culture of inclusion and belonging, businesses need to review all company-wide policies, not just those that are HR related, because otherwise you won't retain that diversity of talent that you've just worked so hard to attract. And this isn't just a possibility, unfortunately, it's the reality. As it says here, according to the Financial Times, UK law firms lose 4 times as many black lawyers due to discrimination than other ethnicities. So that really shows that unless we take purposeful action, this is going to continue to be the norm, and certain professions will continue to lack in that diversity and representation. So with that, what's the starting point? Our advice would be to look at all of your business-wide policies, practices, aspirations, and identify where you can make improvements. Challenge yourself as to whether what you're doing is box ticking, or are you implementing meaningful strategies to improve diversity, inclusion, and belonging. It will feel uncomfortable. It's meant to, because that will drive the change. So that leads us on nicely to our next point, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So speaking up against something that isn't right can cause discomfort, but when we're talking about inclusion, discomfort really needs to be embraced, because it's from here that growth and that change happens. So start with accepting that you're going to find things that aren't okay, but be positive to making those changes and to taking action. And this must be a company-wide shift too. So think about how you're bringing all colleagues on this journey. What tools and platforms can you leverage to support that cultural change? And speaking from a personal perspective, some of my key growth and understanding has come from webinars and roundtables where I've listened and I've heard first-hand lived experiences from people within those underrepresented groups, whether that's been talks on race, power, privilege, ableism, how to be an ally. Sometimes a great way to instigate that cultural shift is just giving your platform over to allow someone else's voice to be heard and understood. And it's important here to make that point around authenticity. It can be really powerful and engaging to hear from business leaders what their learnings are and what they reflect on and do differently. This really amplifies that message of individual accountability and growth, and that everybody's on this journey together. So just to summarise here, start with putting your business under the microscope. Review everything from strategy and values to your employer brand, to training and development, recognition, infrastructure, and all the policies and practices that support that. And of course, recruitment and onboarding will be part of that, but it's really just a cog within a much bigger machine. Identify areas where improvements can be made, and then challenge yourself as to whether something feels authentic, or are you just doing it to tick a box. And if it's the latter, address it and make changes where needed, even if that change is just purely from a positioning perspective, to say this is where we aspire to be, but we're not there yet, because otherwise people will see through it, and as Lindsay said, they'll call it out. So we wanted to dive into this in a bit more detail and just explore some of those examples around box ticking versus meaningful practices.
So I think we're going to play good cop, bad cop here. So I'm going to talk about an example of a box ticking exercise, and then Liz is going to bring that to life in terms of how it will be a more meaningful practice. So to kick us off with an example, it could be a statement on your careers page or a job advert saying you're an inclusive employer.
And then a more meaningful practice would be reviewing all policies and practices constantly, and ensuring that that entire employee life cycle is really inclusive, and that you're educating and bringing all those colleagues along on that journey as well.
And another box ticking exercise is collecting diversity data, either from your recruitment process or your employee population.
And then to make that a more meaningful practice, reviewing that data and really identifying where barriers are, and where you can take that kind of purposeful action. So it's not just saying that you're collecting that diversity data, but really reviewing it and holding that mirror up to take accountability around where those barriers are, what you can change within your practices, and taking that action accordingly.
And finally, I guess I always think of pride with this one, especially when it comes to social media, but celebrating diversity and inclusion days. So there must be hundreds and thousands of businesses on LinkedIn that change their logos and put the rainbow over them. So yeah, it's how you go beyond that, really.
Yeah, and as it says here, kind of the more meaningful practice is enabling and encouraging employee-led networks where you can celebrate diversity and where you're really creating that environment that everybody's differences are really welcomed. And again, it just goes back to that sense of belonging and that truly inclusive culture where people feel empowered to bring them true selves to work.
So we're going to look now at some of the practical steps that you can take to go towards meaningful change. So this starts with audit, and I think this applies no matter how big or small your business is or what stage of this process you think you're already at. But your audit is always going to be your starting point. It will help you to understand where you are at and kind of where your gaps are. And I think analysis goes hand in hand with an audit. So what is that data telling you from your audit about your demographic? What is it telling you about where your gaps are and where your challenges are? Because once you understand that, you can then start to make a commitment. What is it you want to tackle and how are you going to tackle it? And do not be afraid to prioritise. You do not have to focus on every single protected characteristic at the same time. Your analysis might tell you you have a gap in one particular protected characteristic, and make that your priority. It doesn't have to be all of them. Then it's about communication, being really clear with everybody, which we'll move on to in the next slide. But that's from your leadership and your board down to employees. Make sure everybody understands the message and the journey that you're trying to go on. And finally, as you would with any other kind of business change, go through that check and validation process. Anything relating to diversity and inclusion is not a once and done exercise. It needs to be a continual piece of work. So you might audit, commit, prioritise, communicate, and then do it again in 6 months' time. See how things have changed, see how the data has changed, and then that will allow you to reprioritise. So it's a continual cycle. It's not a one-off piece of work and then you can leave it. And as I just referenced, making change around diversity and inclusion is the responsibility and accountability of everybody. I think it can traditionally be seen as something that has to come from the top down or that sits with HR to manage and move the dial on. But actually, it is the responsibility of everyone. So if you look at line managers as an example, they need to be a role model to their employees, but they also need that guidance and role modeling from above as well. And actually, Liz talked about being your true self at work and belonging and kind of employee-led networks. You need to get your employees involved if you're going to make meaningful change. So it's just that reminder that if you're in a HR or talent acquisition team, it's not just on you to do this. It's a group business-wide initiative.
I'm conscious that we've talked through quite a bit there. So just in terms of kind of key takeaways and a wrap up, because it is a very complex subject, our key takeaways would be, first of all, ditch the business case. Your efforts in creating a diverse and inclusive culture need to go way beyond just how it improves business performance. Do it because it's the right thing to do and because your business believes in it. And then second, everyone's on a journey and we're all at different stages on that journey. Don't expect to have all the answers to start with. And that leads us on to the third one, is think marathon, not sprint. There's no quick fix, silver bullets to any of this stuff. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of change from everyone. And importantly, you know, we need to keep that focus and keep the conversation going. So as Lindsay said, it's that continuous cycle of kind of reviewing, acting, prioritising, and just keep going round that that cycle. Fourth is to be authentic, and that's a really key one, because when it comes to embedding D&I strategies or approaches, try not to be too aspirational or too corporate, because that is when it's going to appear disingenuous. You need to be really open and really authentic about where you are on this journey and why that change is important to you. And then the last point is evolve. Embrace the change and allow yourself to feel uncomfortable, because it's from that place where growth and evolution comes from. So I'm now going to hand back to Lindsay to introduce Curve's Diversity and Inclusion Index.
Thanks, Liz. So I guess no matter where you are on your journey already, you will probably know just from webinars and Google research that there is so much information out there about diversity and inclusion and how that relates to all of the protected characteristics. And I think sometimes as a business or as a person that's trying to take a business on a journey, that can be quite overwhelming. So what we've done is we have pulled together through extensive research on our networks, or I guess a one-stop shop. It's an index of where you can go to get support to do with educational programs, consultancy, training and accreditation, maybe particular things that support a specific recruitment process. And we've actually broken that down to every single protected characteristic as well, so that if you've identified through your analysis one particular thing that you want to target, you've got a list here of the right people to speak to and how to get in touch. So we really do hope that this is going to help people as they go on their journeys.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lindsay. So that brings us on very nicely to question time now. If you do have a question for us, then please feel free to pop it in the chat facility or the question facility, and we will come back to you. Alternatively, if you'd rather reach out to Lindsay, Liz, or myself independently, please do so. And that could be around one of those topics that we've got on the index, or if you feel that you've got a particular area within your organisation that you've already highlighted that you need some support on. I can't see any immediate questions coming up, so just while we just check a little bit longer, I'll just re-bring up the contact details for Lindsay and Liz so that you've got those up on the screen should you kind of wish to use them or reach out independently. And again, what I'd love to do is just reconfirm to you that we are here to offer a helping hand. Please do get in touch if you'd like to find out more about how we can support your business with a diverse and inclusive recruitment and HR strategies. It is one of the areas, as you can tell, that we are very passionate about here at the Curve Group. Just by ways of wrapping up, we've got a couple of future webinars coming up. So on the 1st of November, we'll be looking at life after IR35 and beyond, using contractors compliantly, especially with all of the recent announcement and changes that we've just received. And then we're going to squeeze a second webinar in November as well on the 29th, and that's enhancing your candidate experience in a competitive talent market. And then we'll take a break over the Christmas period. Should you wish to have a look at any of our previous webinars, then please do go onto the Curve Group website, where if you click on the Insights link, you'll see all of the webinars there. Finally, all that's left for me to say on behalf of Lindsay, Liz and myself is thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you along this today, and if we can do anything else in the future to support you, please do reach out to us. Thank you very much.